always entertaining world of English grammar. But with a twist, we're going to be looking at common mistakes, specifically the kind that you might overhear, I don't know, maybe at a cafe in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, we're going to take a deep dive into Israeli humor and how that interacts with the nuances of the English language.
It is a deep dive into both. And what's interesting is we're going to see how these like seemingly simple errors often reveal some pretty deeper cultural differences in how Israelis approach, communication in general.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, kind of like a secret window into the Israeli mindset.
Exactly. And we've got a stack of articles here and real life examples. We're going to go through them. It's going to take us from tricky tenses all the way to prepositions, all kind of seasoned with that classic Israeli wit.
Yeah, you'll discover how humor can be a really powerful tool for understanding tricky grammar rules. Mm-hmm. Because honestly, a good laugh helps things stick in your mind way better than any textbook ever could.
Okay, so picture this. You're sipping your cappuccino in a Tel Aviv cafe, and you hear someone say, I go to Islet every summer, but only when my boss agrees. Can you hear the grammar gremlin hiding in that sentence?
So this is a classic case of mixing up the present simple and the present continuous. So the first part, I go to Islet every summer, is spot on. It's a habit, recurring action. But then it takes a detour with, but only when my boss agrees.
So to make it grammatically smooth, we would need to stick with the present simple for that second part as well. So I go to Islet every summer, but only if my boss agrees. And it keeps things consistent and clear, but it also loses a bit of that Israeli charm, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. The original phrasing, while grammatically, off kilter, it has that wonderfully direct Israeli style. It's almost like they're saying, hey, my vacation depends entirely on my boss's mood, you know?
And that's what makes these examples so great. They highlight those subtle cultural differences in how languages are used. Okay, you ready for another one?
Yeah, hit me.
I am always eating hummus. Now, I know hummus is basically a national treasure in Israel, but grammatically speaking, what's happening here?
Yeah, so it's the overuse of the present continuous. And, they're trying to express their deep, love for hummus, almost like it's an ongoing state of being.
Right, but the present continuous is for actions happening, right now, this very second. Like, I am currently devouring a plate of hummus as we speak.
Right, exactly, yeah. And this actually points to a fascinating difference in how Hebrew expresses, frequency or intensity. It might use intensifiers in ways that don't translate directly into English grammar.
So it's like they're trying to capture that feeling of always enjoying hummus, but the English grammar rules just don't quite cooperate.
Precisely. And our source even offers a hilarious correction. I am eating hummus right now, but let's be honest, I always eat hummus, So it acknowledges the grammar rule, but still captures that undeniable hummus love.
Speaking of things we love, let's move on to those tricky past tenses. The past simple and the present perfect. These can really trip people up, even native speakers.
Yeah, for sure. So the past simple is for actions that are completely finished, like a closed chapter. The present perfect, on the other hand, connects the past to the present, like a bridge between then and now.
Okay, so here's an example. Yesterday, I have eaten shawarma. What jumps out at you?
Well, yesterday puts us firmly in the past, which means we should be using the past simple, right? It's a completed action. Yesterday, I ate shawarma. Done.
And of course, our source adds that perfect punchline. And today, I regret nothing. I think we can all relate to that feeling after a delicious shawarma experience.
Absolutely, yeah. It highlights how these examples can be both, funny and educational at the same time. Okay, ready for another one where the present perfect should shine?
Hit me.
Okay. I was in Tel Aviv many times, so what's the issue here?
Well, puts us in the past simple. But many times suggests an experience that's still relevant to the present. It's like a collection of visits that have shaped the speaker's perspective on Tel Aviv.
Exactly, yeah. They capture that ongoing connection. We'd use the present perfect. I have been to Tel Aviv many times.
And our source adds a fantastic finishing touch. I still don't understand the traffic. I think anyone who has braved the streets of Tel Aviv can relate to that sentiment.
It shows how the present perfect isn't just about something that happened. It's about how those past experiences continue to shape your present. And sometimes it's about those enduring mysteries like Tel Aviv traffic.
Okay, before we move on to even more grammar fun, I want to ask you something. Do you think this directness, this getting to the point style that we're seeing in these examples, is it unique to Israeli humor? Or do you see it reflected in other aspects of Israeli culture as well?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is a resounding yes. For the way people interact, on the street, to the lively debates in the Knesset, Israelis are known for their frankness and willingness to express their opinions. It's part of what makes their culture so vibrant and engaging.
So it's not just about grammar. It's about a deeper cultural tendency towards directness and authenticity.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's one of the things that makes these grammar examples, so fascinating. They're not just about correcting, mistakes. They're about understanding, a different way of thinking and communicating. It's like a cross-cultural exchange through the lens of grammar.
Okay, I'm ready to tackle those if clauses. That can sometimes feel like a logic puzzle. We're going to dive into the world of conditionals.
Yes, and we'll see how Israelis, with their characteristic wit, navigate these grammatical twists and turns.
First up, if I will wake up early, I will go to work on time. What's the golden rule we need to remember here?
So in the first conditional, which deals with, real possibilities in the future, we use the present simple after, if not the future tense.
So it should be, if I wake up early, I will go to work on time. Simple and straightforward. But again, that original phrasing with the double will has a certain charm to it, almost like they're trying to will themselves into waking up early.
Yeah, it's that touch of optimism and determination, that we often see in Israeli culture.
And speaking of optimism, let's move on to the second conditional, where we enter the realm of what ifs, those hypothetical daydreams, possibilities. Here's a classic. If I was rich, I bought a penthouse in Tel Aviv. Can you spot the grammar gremlin lurking here?
Yes. So in the second conditional, we use the past subjunctive after if. So instead of was, we use were, even if the subject is singular, right? It's all about those hypothetical scenarios.
Right, so it should be. If I were rich, I would buy a penthouse in Tel Aviv. But of course, our source adds a delightful twist. But instead, I have a nice balcony and a cat. It's that blend of humor and realism that makes these examples so relatable.
It's like they're acknowledging the dream while also embracing the reality, and finding the humor in that contrast.
Okay, you ready to step into the past and explore those what could have been moments? Let's tackle the third conditional, the grammar of hindsight.
Yeah, it's the land of if only and should have, often tinged with a bit of regret, but always with an opportunity for a good laugh as well.
All right, here we go. If I studied more, I passed the psychometric. What's the grammatical slip up here?
So in the third conditional, we use the past perfect after if and would have plus the past participle in the main clause. It's all about looking back at those past choices and imagining different outcomes.
So the grammatically correct version would be, if I had studied more, I would have passed the psychometric. But let's be real, sometimes life has other plans.
And our source captures those other plans perfectly with their addendum. But Netflix happened.
Okay, I think we've covered enough tense territory for now. I'm ready to explore those tiny words that can cause surprisingly big headaches. Prepositions.
Prepositions. Those little words that seem so simple yet can be surprisingly tricky, right? And as you might expect, our Israeli friends often bring their own, unique flair to their usage as well.
Let's start with the classic trio: in, on, and at. These words often trip people up no matter their native language. Here's an example. I was in the bus when I saw my friend. What's the issue here?
Yeah, so the preposition suggests, being enclosed within something, right? For vehicles we typically use on, it's more about being on a surface rather than inside a container.
So to make it grammatically sound, we would say, I was on the bus when I saw my friend.
And of course, the source adds that touch of, relatable humor. Then I pretended not to see him because I was too tired to talk. We've all been there, right?
Absolutely. Sometimes you just need a little quiet time, even on a crowded bus. Okay, ready for another preposition puzzle?
Yeah, bring it on.
Let's meet in Friday at 3. What needs to be adjusted here?
So for specific days of the week, we use on. So it should be, let's meet on Friday at 3.
It's amazing how one tiny word can make such a big difference to the flow and clarity of a sentence.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's one of the things that makes prepositions both, challenging and fascinating. They might be small, but they carry a lot of weight in terms of meaning.
Okay, one last preposition puzzle before we move on. He lives at Tel Aviv. What's the fix here?
So for cities and larger geographical locations, we use in. So it should be, he lives in Tel Aviv. It's about being within a larger area rather than at a specific point.
And our source adds this wonderfully poetic touch. But his heart is in Thailand. It adds a layer of wanderlust to the sentence, wouldn't you say?
It certainly does, yeah. And it shows how prepositions can convey not just, location, but also a sense of belonging, aspiration, or emotional connection. They can be surprisingly evocative, even in their simplest forms.
I love how even these seemingly small grammar points can reveal so much about a culture's personality and way of thinking. It's like a little linguistic adventure.
Absolutely, and we've only just scratched the surface. There are many more Israeli English gems waiting to be uncovered as we continue our deep dive. Now let's dive into those those helpful little verbs that can add shades of meaning to our sentences. Modals: think, can, should, must, might.
Oh yes, these can be tricky because they express everything from ability and permission to obligation and possibility. It's like they add an extra layer of nuance to our verbs.
Right. And as you might expect, our Israeli friends often bring their own, unique spin to these modals.
Okay, I'm ready for some modal magic. What kind of examples do we have?
All right. Well, here's a common one you might hear in that Tel Aviv cafe. Can I to order falafel? What do you notice about this sentence?
It sounds a little off, but I can't quite put my finger on why.
It's that sneaky little to after can. We don't need that infinitive after modal verbs. They're followed directly by the base form of the verb.
I see. So it should be, can I order falafel? Simple and direct, just like that perfect falafel.
Exactly. And our source, of course, adds that essential Israeli touch. Extra tahini, obviously.
Speaking of things we should all do, let's move on to should, that helpful little verb for giving advice and suggestions.
Right. Here's an example from our source. You should to try this restaurant. What's the grammar gremlin hiding in this sentence?
It's that extra to again, isn't it? Seems to be a common pattern.
You're catching on quickly. Just like can, we don't need to after should. It should be, you should try this restaurant.
And knowing our source, I bet they don't stop there.
Yeah.
What kind of culinary wisdom do they offer?
They add, it's overpriced, but totally worth it. It's a sentiment that resonates with anyone who's ever splurged on a delicious meal.
Okay, let's turn up the intensity with must, that verb that expresses, strong obligation or necessity. What kind of Israeli English twist do we see here?
Our source gives us this gem. You must see this.
It's that extra to. Again, making an unwelcome appearance. We just need to say, you must see this. But see what? Exactly. I'm on the edge of my seat.
The source continues with, the hummus is life-changing. I think we're starting to sense a theme here.
It seems like hummus is the common thread that ties all these grammar lessons together.
It certainly adds a delicious layer of cultural context to our deep dive. But it's not just about hummus, right? It's about the enthusiasm and passion that Israelis bring to their recommendations, their conversations, and their lives.
It's like they're saying, if you're going to do something, do it with gusto. Okay, I think we've mastered those modals. Ready to move on to some other common grammar quirks that make Israeli English so unique.
Absolutely, yeah. There are a few more gems we need to explore. First up, let's look at this sentence. I very like coffee. What stands out to you?
Well, very is an adverb that we use to intensify adjectives, not verbs. It's like saying very beautiful or very delicious, but we wouldn't say very walk or very sing, right?
Exactly. In this case, we need an adverb that modifies the verb like.
So we could say something like, I really like coffee, or I absolutely adore coffee, to express that strong feeling.
And because no coffee break is complete without a little treat, our source adds, especially when it comes with free cookies. It's a universal truth, isn't it?
Free cookies make any grammar lesson more enjoyable. Okay, what other Israeli English quirks do we have in store?
Here's another one you might hear in a casual conversation. He have a meeting now. Can you spot the error?
This is about subject-verb agreement. He is singular, so we need the singular form of have, which is has. It should be, he has a meeting now.
You're a grammar whiz. And to add a touch of relatable humor, the source continues with, but he's probably late. Which, if we're being honest, is a pretty common occurrence no matter where you are in the world.
It's those little details that make these examples so fun and memorable. It's not just about the grammar rules. It's about those relatable moments that make us smile. Okay, ready for one last grammar puzzle before we wrap up this section?
Absolutely. Here's a classic. I'm agree with you. What's the grammatical misstep here?
It sounds a bit awkward. I think it's the use of am before agree. Agree is a verb, not an adjective, so we don't need to use the verb to be before it.
Precisely. The correct way to express agreement is simply, I agree with you.
And I bet our source adds their own unique spin to this, right? What kind of twist do they offer?
They say, but my grandmother doesn't. It's like a reminder that even when we find common ground, there's always someone who has a different perspective. And that's okay, you know? It's part of what makes conversations interesting.
It brings a touch of family dynamics to our grammar lesson. It's like a reminder that language isn't just about rules. It's about connecting with others, sharing our thoughts, and sometimes agreeing to disagree.
Exactly. And it's about expressing ourselves in a way that reflects who we are, you know, even if it means bending a few grammar rules along the way. But speaking of bending the rules, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think there's a point where these kinds of grammar quirks become so common that they start to influence the language itself?
Yeah. That's a fascinating question, and it's one that linguists have been debating for ages. On the one hand, there's a need to maintain a standard of grammar so that everyone can understand each other. But on the other hand, language is constantly evolving, and it's often those creative twists and turns that make it so rich and expressive.
And in the case of Israeli English, those quirks often stem from the unique way, you know, Israelis approach communication, you know, with directness, humor, and a healthy dose of chutzpah.
It's like they're not just speaking English, they're speaking Israeli English. A unique blend of language and culture. It's a dialect that's full of life, energy, and of course a lot of laughs.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes these grammar examples so much more than just a lesson in correcting mistakes. It's an opportunity to appreciate the diversity of human expression and to recognize that there's beauty in the way different cultures shape and reshape the languages they use.
Okay, I'm ready for our next adventure. What other linguistic treasures await us in this deep dive into Israeli English? You know, it's amazing how these seemingly simple grammar mistakes can actually reveal so much about a culture's personality.
Yeah, it's like language becomes a window into a culture's values, you know, their humor and even its way of thinking. And in the case of Israeli culture, we see a lot of warmth, wit, and that characteristic straight to the point approach.
Exactly. It's like they're saying, let's cut to the chase and have a laugh along the way. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive into the world of English grammar, Israeli style, I want to touch on something we mentioned earlier, that idea of language evolving.
Yeah.
Do you think these kinds of grammar quirks that we've been exploring, could they actually influence the way English is spoken in Israel over time?
That's a fascinating question, and it's one that, you know, linguists are constantly grappling with. Language is a living, breathing thing, right? It's constantly changing, adapting, and being shaped by the people who use it.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility that these Israeli English quirks could become so ingrained that they become part of the language itself.
Exactly, yeah. It's already happening to some extent, you know. We see it in the way Hebrew words and phrases are being incorporated into everyday English, you know, conversations in Israel. It's like a cultural fusion, a blending of languages that creates something entirely new and unique.
It's a reminder that language isn't just about rules. It's about expression, connection, and creativity. And sometimes those, you know, mistakes are actually innovations that add richness and depth to the language.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's something to celebrate. You know, the way Israelis use English reflects their own cultural identity and their playful approach to communication. It's a reminder that there's no one right way to speak a language. What matters is that we're able to understand each other and to express ourselves authentically.
Absolutely. And I think that's a valuable lesson for all of us, whether we're learning a new language, exploring a different culture, or simply trying to communicate more effectively in our everyday lives.
We can all learn from the way Israelis, you know, embrace those grammar quirks and turn them into opportunities for humor and connection, right? It's a reminder to not take ourselves too seriously, you know, to have fun with language and to appreciate the diversity of human expression.
Okay, before we say lahitrate to this deep dive, I have to ask, what's the most surprising or insightful thing you've learned from exploring these Israeli English grammar examples?
You know what struck me the most is the way humor is used to navigate those linguistic bumps in the road. It's like they're turning those grammar struggles into something relatable and even enjoyable.
Yeah. It's like those mistakes, when viewed through the lens of humor, become less about errors and more about like glimpses into a different way of thinking and expressing oneself.
Exactly, yeah. They become opportunities to appreciate the richness and diversity of human communication, to see the world from a different perspective, and to maybe even have a good laugh at ourselves along the way.
All right, ready for our final thought-provoking question. This one's for you, dear listener. We've explored how Israeli culture influences English grammar. Now we want to hear from you. How do you think your own cultural background or experiences have shaped the way you learn and use language?
Think about those quirky sayings, those unique expressions, or even those grammar habits that reflect your own cultural identity. Maybe you have a funny story about a time you made a similar grammar mistake, or a time when you were surprised by how someone from a different culture used language.
We encourage you to share your thoughts or experiences, perhaps even your own funny grammar slip-ups, in the comment section below. Because after all, language is a journey we take together. And the more we share our experiences, the richer and more enjoyable that journey becomes.
So, dear listener, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep laughing. The world of language is full of surprises, and sometimes it's those little stumbles and missteps that lead to the most delightful discoveries.
And on that note, it's time to wrap up our deep dive into English grammar, Israeli style. We hope you've enjoyed the journey, and maybe even learned a thing or two along the way. Until next time, keep those grammar gremlins at bay.
Or, better yet, embrace them and have a good laugh together.